Welcome to the Bald Brad channel. Today, we're doing something a little bit different here because this morning I was sitting on my couch having a nice warm cup of coffee, an all-American brew, drinking from the Bald Brad Show mug, flipping through YouTube when a channel popped in my feed called Garrett's Adventures. And boy, oh boy, did this man's channel spark something inside of me. He's a 19-year-old man sailing across the ocean all by himself for 30 days. And while binge watching this, I come to part 3, and this specific scene here, I think sums up, along with his entire channel, what our American youth are lacking in. Right now, he's hit with a dilemma. If he goes one direction, he runs into rocks in a shallow part of the ocean, which could be catastrophic. His other decision right now is deviate away from that shallow part and rocks and head into an enormous storm in a small sailboat, and that could be catastrophic as well. And he presents this situation to us all. We're going to watch it, and then it's going to lead into other avenues of, again, what I think our American youth are lacking in. Hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment down below. Head over to Garrett's Adventures. Show him some love. Tell him you're coming from the Bald Brad channel. Hit that like and subscribe button for him as well. Let's go ahead and roll it.
All of this is one big ass storm looking thing. I can see the top of it and it's huge. It's way up there. I'm heave to right now the best I can, but I can't get this boat to properly do it. I can't just, if I hang around here, there's a rock to worry about, or like a shallow place down where I'm gonna be headed if I'm just bobbing around. But if I keep going, then I'm sailing into the frickin' center of the biggest storm I've seen out here that I'm already in. And it's pretty nasty. You can't see it on the GoPro, but there are some waves breaking on the boat and I'm not very pleased. I don't know what the hell to do. I don't know what the right choice is, so maybe just wait till morning, see what happens.
That little clip sparked an interest in me, and one in which I've wanted to talk about for quite some time, and that's what I think our American youth is lacking in. This guy's channel sums up the idea of grit. He trained for this for 2 years. That takes a lot of perseverance and stamina and, again, grit to make something like this happen. And with that grit, that stamina, that perseverance, all those things leads him to be successful. But within that perseverance, that overcoming and that grit are obstacles, hence overcoming. Those struggles are going to present themselves in different ways throughout our life and in our youth. But here's the thing. Our youth aren't seeing those challenges and having to go through that grit and overcoming things in the same level as those prior to us. Meaning, in some way, shape, or form, sometimes in life, we have to seek out that grit. We have to put our youth into situations where they might get hurt, where they're going to struggle, where the decisions that they're going to make have implications, maybe not just on themselves, but also on others. I'll give you a prime example. I played ice hockey for over 25 years. You have to make split-second decisions that it could impact you, could lead to an injury for you, or if you pass the puck called a suicide pass to one of your teammates, that's going to have dire consequences for them because they're about to get their world rocked when they never saw it, meaning they could be injured. Now everybody's upset with you, meaning your decisions are going to impact other people's decisions or have consequences for other people as well, or yourself. And that's exactly what Garrett's Adventures was presenting right here. He had a dilemma. He had to decide between two things that are terrible, and he wasn't sure which route to go, which one to do. Again, that leads me to this next video right here, where we have Ben Sass talking about his book called The Vanishing American Adult. And I've read this many of times. I highly recommend that you pick up yourself a copy. He was previously the senator of Nebraska. I believe he's the president of the University of Florida or Florida State, something like that. But this book goes into detail about how our youth need to be presented with situations to go through obstacles and struggles and grit and overcome those things. And if they do so, that's going to put them more along the line of a path of success rather than not. So we're going to listen to this clip, and then I got a TED Talk video that I want to cover as well. If you have a youth that needs to see this video, please share it with them. Share it with your friends and family. Again, hit that like and subscribe button. Let's go ahead and roll it.
So, Senator, your new book is called The Vanishing American Adult. And in it, you say that you believe the United States is in the midst of an unprecedented coming-of-age crisis. What do you mean by that?
Too many of our kids are stuck in this category that I call perpetual adolescence. And this book is not about assigning blame. It's 2/3 constructive. It's 1/3 kind of stage setting. But if we were going to assign blame, it's about us, the parents and the grandparents, who are not doing enough to help our kids understand that scar tissue is something to be celebrated. Developing a work ethic, it often stinks and aches and is painful at the time you're going through it, but it makes you tougher. Scar tissue is the basis of future character. And we're not having those conversations with our kids, and that's kind of a unique thing in human history.
One of the things you talk about in your book is recent graduates moving home after college. What's wrong with that?
So there's nothing wrong with intentionally having a multi-generational household. I think there's a lot of great stuff about that. As a father of 3 little kids, I think back, if we'd have had a mother-in-law or a mother and a father-in-law around at times when the kid number 2 came and we're exhausted in the middle of the night, there's a lot to be celebrated about that intentionality. What's happening now, though, is not intentional. It's sort of passive drift back into the nest. The number one address for kids after they graduate college now is moving back into mom and dad's basement. Some of that is declining economic opportunity over the last 10 and 15 years. But most of it is more closely connected to the fact that we've raised our kids insulated from work. They've grown up sort of being protected from work instead of being taught that there's freedom to be found in finding meaning in work, not avoiding work. And right now, production and consumption are categories that most of them don't really experience when they're 12 and 14 and 16, the way most people in human history past would have.
But as you noted,
that is so key right there. Is, again, presenting our youth with obstacles, with decision making, with creating rationale during certain situations, having value of hard work, and again, struggle overcoming all those things. Again, that could all be summarized in one word called grit. It's not presenting itself today as it did prior in previous generations. And we're partly to blame as adults and the people that are supposed to sit there and educate and put our youth through these obstacles so they can grow. And that grit, that passion, that perseverance that they're lacking in is also stopping them from being successful. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that this is all youth, but it is a massive problem. And I see that even in the classroom. The amount of grit and lack of struggle and not wanting to overcome and push oneself to be successful on a homework assignment or something as small as solving a mathematical problem is insane. And that's because of the lack of obstacles presented before them in the household, maybe on the field when they're playing a sport or at a performing arts, because us adults try to make things easier for them, and understandably so, but at the same time, we also need to make things harder for them so they can learn that idea of grit. And that's what Ben Sass is talking about right here.
economic conditions have played a role in that decision, because I know covering after the Great Recession, a number of folks who said we'd want to go out, and young people who had hoped to follow in the footsteps of their parents and grandparents and, you know, buy the house and get to a place of self-sufficiency, but the economic conditions simply didn't allow that.
Absolutely. That's a big part of the current moment we're at. But this story is more like the last 20 or 30 years and the next 50 to 100 years, because what's happening now is a shortening in the duration of an average job in ways that's never happened before in human history. Hunter-gatherers and settled agrarian farmers, they didn't pick jobs. They just became 10 and 12 and 14 and did more of what grandma and grandpa had done. There was no job choice. At industrialization, there was job choice kind of in a mass way for the first time in human history, but you did it once. 15 or 20 years old, you go out and you take a job and you have it till death or retirement. Our kids today are going to have to pick a new job when they're 40 and 45 and 50 and 55, because their jobs are going to evaporate because of technology. They're going to have to be more resilient than the generations coming before them. And in a way, we're bubble wrapping them more at exactly the same time where we should want to be helping them toughen up in a way that prepares for the unprecedented opportunities, but also scary disruptions of the new economy.
Well, let's talk more about this perpetual.
In a day and age where AI is exploding right now, I have this conversation with seniors of, you need to think about your decision making now. Even though you're a senior in high school and we're just entering senior year, you have to start thinking about what your career choice is going to be, because if you go in to college with dead set eyes on, say, coding or whatever it may be, and AI's predominantly capitalizing on that space of creating code through the use of AI rather than human intelligence, then you could spend 4 years of your college career. You could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on something into a career in 4 years that could be gone in terms of how AI is exponentially increasing and impacting many industries, not just coding, but many, many industries. That decision making, just like we saw in Garrett's Adventures, has massive consequences on the success that you're going to have in the future. And that success could be career choice. It comes in many different levels and many different ways. But when you're hit with that roadblock and you're not used to having that grit and overcoming that perseverance, it can have dire consequences on your life. And we are seeing that in today from a small level, like I said in the classroom, from just a mathematical problem, giving up because you're struggling and not willing to have that perseverance and that grit to overcome that obstacle of learning and figuring out the solution to that problem. That expands so much further into big, larger scales to where you can have massive, dire consequences on your retirement, on your living situation, on your career path. The choices you make today are going to impact the choices and decisions that you make in the future and the outcome of those decisions that you made prior. Let's continue.
Adolescence that you speak of. You say kids don't know what an adult is anymore, that for older generations it is, quote, our fault more than it is theirs that we ended up here. Is this a problem that schools need to fix, parents need to fix?
So if you're listening here, it says our kids simply don't know what an adult is anymore or how to become one. Many don't see a reason even to try, perhaps more problematic. The older generations have forgotten that we need to plan to teach them. It's our fault more than theirs. To bring this home, kind of this idea, I was watching a video and it was kind of a drama. It was real life, but it was talking about, I think he was 24, 25-year-old male, meaning a grown adult. To put in perspective, there was, I think, 26-year-olds and up into their mid-30s that voted for, or should I say, partook in the Declaration of Independence. These men were lawyers at this time. They had careers already built. And this 25-year-old guy, I shouldn't say kid, but man, was talking to another adult that was about 45, and they were basically talking trash to one another. The 25-year-old man was saying, how and why are you talking to me like this? Why are you going off on a 25-year-old kid? And that's kind of why I mentioned kid. My brain's already jumping ahead. But that's the problem right there. That 25-year-old man is thinking that he's 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old. However, he thinks he's still a youth. He still thinks he's a young adult, which he is, but he's also a grown man. And that comes into play here with the vanishing American adult, where kids simply don't know what an adult is anymore. And that's why you have grown adults saying, oh, look at me, I'm adulting. Yes, you're doing laundry. Yes, you have a career. Yes, you have a job. Yes, you have to start planning for retirement. Yes, you have to budget and all these things. But that is foregone. That is forgotten. And that's why our youth are making, even in my age at 34, are making dramatic decisions that are leading to dramatic consequences, and they don't know how to resolve those consequences.
Or is this up to every individual?
So it's all of the above, though I think we expect more out of schools than schools can possibly deliver on. We put a huge burden on schools, and in a way, we need to understand that schooling is just one of many tools in life, and right now we've come to a place where we sort of drift, where our kids think that grade promotion through school is their main work, and then outside of the school day, it's a time for consumption. That's a little bit odd historically. Our kids, as you and I were talking during the break, are 15, 13, and 6. And last year, we like to work them. We think it's good for them. Right. And so last year we shipped off our then 14-year-old to a cattle ranch in the middle of Nebraska and had her help deliver baby cows for a month. And in Nebraska in March, when baby cows are being born, it's often 0 and below. It's tough. At midnight and 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., you got to be out there making sure they don't get frostbite and tag a baby. And a baby cow is between 50 and 120 pounds when born. And you need to hook it back up with mama if they get separated out in the field. And it stinks. It's miserable work.
Sounds like tough love, Senator.
It's tough love. And my daughter knew that it was suffering, and she also knew it was making her tougher. She didn't like that she got rubber gloves that went up to her shoulder. She didn't know she might lose a watch in there delivering a baby cow. And yet she was texting me all these things that basically were her screaming out, you know what, I think I'm growing up. I turned them into tweets because it was just great stuff. Hashtag from the ranch. And I'm tweeting out my daughter's coming of age work experience. And people all over the political spectrum in Nebraska are calling me saying, how can my kids suffer 2? What's that rancher's phone number? My kid's playing video games 7 hours a day. I want to ship them to the ranch. Everywhere I went in Nebraska for about 2 months after that, nobody wanted to talk politics. They wanted to talk parenting.
And what does she think about it now?
Oh, she looks back on it fondly. She's proud, right? I mean, in Nebraska, you can drive when you're 14, so she had already learned how to drive, but she didn't know how to drive a stick, and she got to learn to drive a pickup out there, and all these ranch dogs start hopping on her four-wheeler with her in the middle of the night, and she has real responsibility in the world. These cows who could be in duress during labor, they needed her. She was important. She was adding value in the world. Now when she
Right there, adding value, giving them responsibility, quote, that matters. Are we giving our youth responsibility that matters? As the adults, as the parents, is that what we're doing? And I don't think we are. And if we are giving them responsibility, we're not inculcating in them that this responsibility matters. And remember, at different ages of brain development, I almost said students, but that is true. Our youth are not able to actually comprehend why it matters, and the impact of that decision today is going to impact a consequence or a decision that might come to fruition in the future. Like, they're totally not able to do that. And that's nothing against them. That has to do with the development of the brain. But us as adults, that is not what we're doing. We're not inculcating this responsibility. We're not inculcating the things that matter. We're not inculcating the values that's going to make them be successful in the future, that's going to present them with times of struggle, that's going to present them with grit. We're not doing that. And we need to do that at home. And I think Ben Sass brought up a really great point. And again, as an educator, we're there to educate on mathematics, English, engineering, whatever it may be in the school system. But what it's turned into is doing those things, yes, but also a time of let's babysit. All this classroom behavior has erupted across the United States. Students are backlashed. They're going after their teachers. They're physically and mentally abusing them left and right, which if you think about any other area of work would be an HR violation up the wazoo. It'd be considered and deemed a hazardous work environment. But because it's the school system, we go, they're kids, they're youth, they're teenagers. No other work area would you really see that. Again, there would be HR violations, but we let it go. And because we're letting it go, are we teaching responsibility to our youth? Are we showing them that their decisions there of abusing another student or bullying or doing whatever it is, are we presenting the consequences in a right way? Because a lot of this is, well, let's talk about our feelings. Let's sit down in a circle here and have a kumbaya. Or should there be some punishment within this? And that goes even to the prison system. That goes into all these cities and a political environment. But what I want to talk about here, again, is the grit. And us as adults have to present that grit and put our youth into situations, not have them sitting there and presenting grit through a video game or presenting grit through having them sweep a floor. Find that grit and that perseverance for them where they have to actually overcome something that matters. Like Ben Sass did, overcoming that cold weather, waking up in the morning consistently and having to do some hard labor work. Send your son or daughter somewhere across and have them work for free. What Ben Sass doesn't bring up here is the people that actually went after him for doing this that's presented in his book. See, there's adults out there that don't like it when you take a hold of your child's life and put them through something that's going to make them prosper and inculcate a value in them that's going to allow them to be successful in the future. There's going to be people out there that are going to hinder you, and they're going to use the law to do it. And because Ben Sass's daughter was a teenager and was working for free on a farmer or rancher's land, they went after them for child labor laws. So that's something he brings up in his book. Again, I implore you to read it, called The Vanishing American Adult, because that is what is happening right now. And what we have here is this doctor, Angela Lee Duckworth, talk about the strongest predictor for success here. And I couldn't agree with her anymore. Let's roll it.
What if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned.
And that's the thing, is that us as adults, we've removed that idea of failure. And that happens in the education system early on with our youth. So not only could it be happening at home as the parent or guardian with that child, that son or daughter, but it's also then going to school and receiving that same mindset that, well, you're not going to fail. We're going to help you not fail. You don't do your homework. You don't do the thing you're supposed to do. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. We'll give you half credit or full credit. You failed on a test. Don't worry about that. Let's do test corrections. You didn't learn a damn thing, but let's go ahead and just have you do it anyways, and we'll pass you through the system. Nobody gets held back anymore. Nobody learns that the consequences they're making, the decision they're making now, have consequences for the future, and that's how you learn. Now, is it tough to watch that? Absolutely, because you don't want somebody to go through that struggle, but you know that that struggle is going to benefit them in the future. Not always, but a lot of the time. There's certain struggles, there's certain perseverance and overcoming that's going to allow them to be successful. And then we have to ask ourselves, are we doing that as adults? And I don't think we are. And I think that's why as generation and generation comes along and things get easier, our life gets more comfortable as Americans. Not everybody. I understand that. Again, not everybody. A lot of people are in some tough situations, but there's people in those tough situations that have grit and perseverance that are going to allow them to succeed. You want to know who utilizes grit and perseverance to a scale that no other country does? Is the Navy SEALs. You don't have to be intelligent. You don't have to be the best swimmer. You don't have to be the best shooter necessarily. To go through BUD/S and to capitalize on that, you just have to have grit. You just have to have that goal that you know if you make it through and listen to anybody's podcast, where that's O'Neill, who wrote The Operator, who killed Osama bin Laden, whether you read or hear about any Navy SEAL book or podcast, they're going to talk about that idea of perseverance, that overcoming that struggle, but that end goal of being a SEAL at the end of the day. And it was grit that allowed them to do it. But we're not inculcating that value in our youth. I don't think so. Some people are. And what we're doing is we're limiting or completely not giving our youth that opportunity to struggle and overcome those obstacles. And that happens at home. And that happens in the school system. But right now, all of that is crumbling. And what we're doing as a society through media, through movies, through YouTube, is we're saying, hey, if you're a low income family or you're in the inner city or whatever it may be, you can't overcome because there's a nameless, faceless, shadowy figure out there that's going to stop you from being successful. And that can come in the form of racism, or they're going to shout systemic racism or xenophobia, whatever it may be. There's all these other nameless, faceless, shadowy figures out there that you can't name, you can't pinpoint towards, but they're out there, and that's what's going to hinder you from being successful. That's not the case. Is there racism out there? Absolutely. Are there things out there that can hinder you? Absolutely. That's why it's called overcoming. That's why it's called having a goal. That's why it's called struggle. There's going to be things and obstacles in your life, no matter what you do, that are going to try and stop you from becoming or doing that said thing that you want to do or become. And what we're doing is we're shadowing that. We're masking it. And rather than blaming oneself and taking personal responsibility for our actions, regardless at whatever age, we're blaming it on somebody else. And you see that on all levels. You see that in sporting now. As a referee in ice hockey, I see that all the time. It's the referee's fault that I tripped the kid. It's the referee's fault that I hooked the guy. And the coaches, rather than taking a teaching moment for that youth of saying, this is what you did wrong, don't blame it on that guy. It's not his fault. He's doing his job of making the call. We're now doing a teaching moment here for that youth to realize that it was his mistake. It was his personal responsibility to take hold of his actions and not do the thing that he did. But we don't do that anymore. It's always somebody else's fault. And furthermore, this is kind of a deviation, but to kind of build credibility in terms of this idea of personal responsibility. There was a study done on 10,000 millionaires, and the number one trait that all of them had predominantly in like the high 90th percentile was personal responsibility. They took personal responsibility for their actions, and they didn't blame other people. Even if maybe other people were to blame in some way, shape, or form, it was still maybe putting yourself in a situation that you shouldn't have, being in a scenario that you shouldn't have been in, or making a decision earlier on in life that led to a consequence that basically unraveled 15, 20 years later. So we have to take hold of personal responsibility. We have to put our youth in situations that is going to build grit and perseverance. Put them through something that will allow them, yes, to be successful, but guide them along, regardless of whether they have struggles or not, to make sure that they are successful, but not having so much intervention in terms of they don't feel like they had personal responsibility that matters. We can't take their responsibility from them. They have to have that responsibility. It's our job to create that responsibility that matters. That's what Ben Sass did. That's our job as adults. That's our job as educators. And I hope that we can do that as Americans so that we can get back on the path of where we were prior to where at age 14 kids are writing books. At age 14, 15 to 16, kids, youth, were doing things that matter, to becoming lawyers, to becoming accountants, to become engineers, and building society in America where we can be back on top again. Because right now, honestly, we are not. We are not back on top to where we used to be, and we must be. And it's our job as Americans to inculcate those values in our youth. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, it was something a little bit different. It's something that sparked something inside of me to talk about, something that I'm seeing as an educator, something that I'm seeing as an American. I want to know if you agree with me. Is grit the number one predictor of success? And if it is, let me know down below. And if it's not, let me know down below and build an argument around that. Folks, thank you so much. Hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow here on The Will Brad Show.